All right, Unit 1, Content Objective number 2. Unit 1, Geographical Skills. And today our objective is to describe how cartographers use the concepts of space, place, and regions to compare regions. Note that these are vocabulary words that were covered very briefly in Content Objective number 1. For the test, you're going to have to know the definitions and how to apply your understanding of space, place, and regions when comparing regions. The I CAN statements for this lesson is list 4 ways to identify a location, define the key terms and concepts of toponym, site, and situation, use a mathematical location to define map coordinates and time zones. And you will have to use this skill in the test, being able to find math coordinates and time zones within the United States. When we talk about a place, it gives a sense of feeling, which makes it unique. Oftentimes it was through many places here in the United States have European explorer toponyms, Christian toponyms. They're oftentimes depicted by colonizers or explorers that discover a place, that provide that unique sense of a place. Oftentimes when we look at a place, we can look at coordinates, which gives it an absolute location, or it can be an absolute location, which can be not exact coordinates, but a place oftentimes has a toponym, which is the name of a place. 4 ways to identify a location. You have the toponym, the place name, the site. A site has usually what can be unique physical characteristics, but they can be more of uniformed, homogeneous physical characteristics as well. And then a situation is when you're comparing a location or a place to in reference to another location or place. And then mathematical location is just a way of talking about absolute location. So you have intersecting coordinates, exact coordinates. So like in a GPS, you'll have the exact coordinates that match up to the hour, the minute, and the second that overlap a certain area of a map, as a point of a map, an exact point of a map. Toponyms, again, they're the names of the place. Usually, as you mentioned, usually it's a founder or an explorer or of a famous person. Oftentimes they fall along the lines of ancient history and religion. When we look at North America and Australia and in parts of South America, we see a lot of impact of colonization within the toponyms. And then also physical features are evident, as we can see in the picture right here to the bottom. Welcome to the accident, talking about a geographical site that has physical unique characteristics. And then it can also be named after resources, such as like places in Nevada that are called Gold Point or Silver Peak or Eureka would be named during the gold rush in the United States. And toponyms can change, and they often do, based on the changing of history. As we can see with one of the examples would come to mind is Lake Calhoun. Historically, it was named after what was identified later as a slave owner and significant founder of that region of Minneapolis, and recently turned to Mudabeskaya. Bedemakaska, sorry. And again, they do change over time. A site, as I already mentioned, they're unique physical characteristics. Sometimes they're also common physical characteristics that might be seen in other regions of the world, so the uniqueness can be relative. Oftentimes when we talk about common physical characteristics, we're talking about how it appears, how it smells, how it feels. We look at the lithospheres, the atmosphere, vegetation. We look at the biosphere, the lithosphere, the topography and elevation. Site often influences locations because they have that unique or common characteristic for defenses throughout history, maybe a high cliff or an escarpment like in Fort Snelling in Minneapolis or near Minneapolis. And then also economic reasons can influence locations, such as um, when we look at one of the largest major world dominant cities in New York City, and we look at New York City and we specifically take a look at Wall Street, that depiction of those skyscrapers give us the influence of economic superpower, and they can also be depicted by resources. The situation, again, is taking a look at one place in relative location to another place. And it can be places or it can be sites as well. They can be in relative location to other sites. And oftentimes you use situations to describe a comparison location or characteristics. Mathematical location, again, you oftentimes we use the grid system, which is made up of our lines of longitude and latitude. Latitude are lines that go the width of the globe, and then lines of longitude go up and down or north and south on the globe. The 0 degree prime meridian runs through Greenwich, England. That is a invisible line that was created during European colonial dominance, and then we also have an equator, which cuts the globe into the northern and southern hemispheres, 0 to 90 degrees in the north and 0 to 90 degrees in the south. And the prime meridian does the same with lines of longitude, are also referred to as meridians, and so we have the meridians that divide east and western hemispheres. When we look at lines of latitude, they do follow. They're symmetrical. And then we look at longitude. Longitude are, there are 24 lines of longitude. They were created by the Europeans during European colonialism. So there's 24 time zones. And those lines are not necessarily the same length. And then also, when we look at lines of longitude and latitude, a lot of it was based on astronomy and time. All right, time zones. 24 time zones, as I already mentioned. They're 15 degrees apart. They're set up by the lines of longitude, also referred to as meridians by European English dominance during the colonial period. They were also created in the U.S. by railroads in the 1880s when the Transcontinental Railroad was linking both east and west, and then we began to see railroads connecting the southern and northern parts of the U.S. to industrial centers. And then we also look at the baseline, which is known as the mean time or Greenwich Mean Time, the standard time for economic business. That starts with the 0 degrees, the prime meridian. U.S. has 4 time zones, which includes Alaska and Hawaiian Islands. The international date line is a jagged line of longitude that is marks the 180 degrees longitude point, which again divides the east and the west. All right, here we can see the prime meridian that goes right through parts of North Africa and England. And then when we look at the international date line, there's that jagged line that again divides the world into eastern and western hemisphere. When you go from Asia to California, you lose a day, and then when you go, or you jump ahead a day, when you go back the other way, then you lose a day. So if you go to California to Asia, you'll lose a day. All right. All right. And we will continue, being that it's just, again, the COVID situation, we have to cover a lot of knowledge here. So we'll continue with content objective number 2. I can statements are, this is a continuation. Describe 3 different types of regions. Choose a region and apply it to the city of Woodbury, and classify how space is organized by human geographers with using the concepts of distribution, density, and diffusion. All right, regions. They're particular places in the world. They have particular characteristics, and those particular characteristics usually involve one or two or more distinct traits. Sometimes they're difficult to define because they can overlap. Places may belong into regions. Places, remember, they're usually locations of particular characteristics that are influenced by toponyms or founders or settlers. And they're much smaller in size than regions. Regions, there are three different types. One is formal, the second is functional, or also referred to as nodal, and the third is vernacular or perceptual or opinionated regions. Formal regions, this is where you see common characteristics of everyone. The common characteristics can be political characteristics, can be economic characteristics, it can be cultural characteristics, which creates a uniformity throughout the entire region. And then formal regions also have agreed upon boundary lines. So those boundary lines are formal lines, and you can measure them on a map. Functional region, you have a node or a focal point. That focal point oftentimes is of like a service. It can be like a radio station or a newspaper, or it can be a manufacturing factory. We will see the greatest communication, the greatest production closest to that node, and as you move away from that node, it weakens. This is known as distance decay. We can take a look at the map here. We can see the focal or the functional regions of major cities throughout the United States, where we'll learn later that that's where we're going to see a clustering of economic jobs of various economic sectors. And here's a focal or a focal point, or which is known as a nodal or functional region of 2 FM stations and 1 AM station. And so we can see we look at 91.7, as you get further away, we can see less people listen to 91.7, and when we get to the areas outside of purple, there's nobody listening to 91.7. Again, this shows an example of distance decay. And we can see the largest functional region would be 91.9 FM. We can look at pizza delivery, and here again we're looking at pizza delivery where it's free, so it has a larger concentration of people buying pizza, and we see distance decay where there's a delivery charge added in the red. We can look at the functional region of a mall. Again, the epicenter or node of the mall is going to have the highest concentration of patronage or people buying products, and then as you get further away, less people. Distance decay. All right, vernacular region, also known as a perceptual region or also referred to as an opinionated region. Oftentimes it's quantified by cultural identity. People believe it exists, but it's hard to define. Perceptual regions of the U.S. Often when we look at perceptual regions, again, there are cultural stereotypes in a lot of ways. Southerners, lower education, they talk slower, they're devoted to Baptist church, etc. Those are stereotypes. They believe in them, but they're not necessarily a proven fact. And then we see Northerners and Midwesterners, and Northerners again like to say oof da, and they have a certain vernacular that's spoken they recognize, but it's not necessarily a fact. It's more of a stereotype. Those are perceptual regions. Globalization is the figurative shrinking of the world. It's shrinking the world in terms of time-space compression. With greater technology, communication happens almost instantaneous from one end of the globe to the next, and it's moved by economic cooperation, and that shrinks the scope of the world. So the world isn't shrinking, but the technology is making it much easier to communicate in it brings people closer together in what is a global economy. What are the main vehicles for this global economy? Transnational corporations. Those are large corporations that go beyond the formal boundaries of headquarters of a founding nation, and they're located abroad in many countries, or also referred to as states, and they become. But it also has the effect that transnational corporations has on globalization. It creates homogeneous landscapes. So how do we know homogeneity? We can see it by the large corporation symbols such as McDonald's, or names such as Citibank or Samsung. Again, it creates a uniform landscape where everyone is homogeneous. With this homogeneity, creates specialization on local levels. That specialization can come in concepts that you won't be tested on, but neolocalism or globalization, where we get people that specialized in their service or shop production. And then culture, as I already mentioned, it creates a cultural landscape. Everyone has the same name brand. There's not much variation in clothing, music. That's kind of the homogeneous, standardized cultural landscape that globalization and transnational corporations move forward. And then traditions often are threatened to full culture. Distribution. Distribution is the arrangement of phenomenon across space. Distribution has the property of density. It's the frequency, the number of things that appear. Concentration is looking at that density and how spread out is it. It's either clustered close together, or it's dispersed, spread apart. And then we look at patterns, and patterns, you're not going to be tested on the patterns, but usually they'll follow geometric patterns, like the grid system of some cities due to the land ordinances 1787, or you'll see what is rectangular, because a lot of settlements early on happen along rivers, so you'll see a rectangular settlement or a long lot settlement, or they could be organic, or also referred to as chaos, not following particular patterns. All right, so here we look at a map. We can see the density of populations in Canada, and we can see that the largest arithmetic density is found in the southeastern region of Canada. And then we can see the largest concentration is found in central Canada. In patterns, right here we have a linear pattern because of major city, port cities, early settlements along major bodies of water. And then we can see over here is more of a linear pattern as well, where we see these large dots following rivers. All right, diffusion, that's the spread of something. So when something diffuses, it spreads. It comes from a hearth, which is a point of origin. A point of origin is an idea, or a thought, or an innovation is where a hearth is. Different than a node, it doesn't serve a function, but a hearth is a point of innovation or origin or an idea. Basic diffusions, it's either relocation diffusion or expansion diffusion. Relocation is spreading through physical movements, so immigration or migration, people taking with them their language, their religion, ethnicity. It's very slow, and it's in small number. Expansion diffusion there's three forms of expansion diffusion. Expansion diffusion is snowball-like diffusion. It spreads very fast in large number. The first expansion diffusion is hierarchical diffusion. The hierarchical diffusion comes from a person of power, like a president or a high political figure, or it can be authority. It can also be a celebrity with fashion trends. It has to come from someone with powerful influence. Those are hierarchical expansion diffusions. Relocation, again, we can see with religion, slow moving. People move, they take it with them. It's like luggage. We can see hierarchical TV companies, large broadcasting companies have a lot of power and authority with the diffusion, spreading of media content. The other ones are stimulus, which was not in the slide, but stimulus is the spread of an idea that builds upon an idea. So an idea that previously exists but is built upon to make it better, like the iPad 1 versus the iPad 5, that's stimulus diffusion. And then there's also hierarchical stimulus, and then contagious diffusion, which isn't listed, and contagious is spreading between people, rapid spreading between people.